I've come to a point in my life where I wake up in the morning and have to ask myself, why am I playing Mortal Kombat on the Game Boy? At this point, there's really no reason to, since any modern smartphone can emulate the arcade original. From a logical perspective, the game's existence makes no sense. Mortal Kombat had cutting-edge graphics when it hit the market, so taking this cutting-edge graphical achievement and porting it to a glorified calculator with 64 kilobytes of memory is paradoxical. However, this is Mortal Kombat, the best-selling fighting game series ever, on one of the most popular handheld gaming systems ever. It's a match made in money-making heaven. Despite that, can this Game Boy Mortal Kombat deliver on an authentic and fun fighting experience? Or are they just some quick cash grabs? Let's find out. Episode 9, Mortal Kombat on the Game Boy. Welcome to Weird Fighting Games. Released on September 13th, 1993, a day dubbed Mortal Monday, Mortal Kombat Game Boy was one of the many ports they released that day, alongside Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, and Game Gear ports. It didn't matter what system you had, you could play Mortal Kombat. On the surface level, Mortal Kombat on Game Boy is a very faithful port. You've got the full arcade experience with a full arcade ladder, endurance matches, and the two iconic bosses, Goro and Shang Tsung. But the closer you look, the more the cracks begin to show, thanks to the limitations of the Game Boy. The limited color palette butchers the photorealistic sprites. Some look better than others. In my opinion, Liu Kang has never looked better. If they shrunk the sprites down, I think it'd make the game look a lot better. These huge sprites just take up way too much space on such small screen real estate. The stages are also very basic, and there are only 3 stages, likely due to the memory limitations. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but something I can't overlook is the inclusion of the pit, and not having the stage fatality. Sure, the Game Boy probably couldn't replicate it one-to-one, but at least let me launch the guy off the stage. There is a slight problem that is Game Boy exclusive, and I think you can already tell. For most fighters, this wouldn't be an issue, but since this is Mortal Kombat, a series known for their multicolored ninjas, telling Sub-Zero and Scorpion apart has never been harder. The biggest omission from this port is Johnny Cage.
What in the actual fuck?
Good evening, Johnny Cage.
That's right, we're missing an entire character. Come on, man, why couldn't it be Kano? No one liked him until they gave him his Scottish accent from the movie anyway. Johnny is one of my favorite Mortal Kombat characters, so it stings anytime he isn't included. Now, his lack of inclusion could be for various reasons. The most boring being memory limitations, or maybe punching people in the groin was a little too extreme for the Game Boy. Or maybe it had something to do with the original actor who portrayed Johnny Cage, Daniel Pesina. You see, Pesina sued Midway, the publishers of Mortal Kombat, over the rights to use his likeness in the home ports of Mortal Kombat 2, and alleged that he wasn't paid proper royalties to use his likeness, though he would ultimately lose this case. In addition, Pesina appeared in an advertisement for a rival fighting game, Bloodstorm, the self-proclaimed fighting game for real fighters. Dressed very similar to Johnny Cage, meaning he was wearing pants and had some sunglasses on. This for sure created more bad blood between the two, which is why Johnny isn't in Mortal Kombat 3 and they had to get new sprites for Mortal Kombat Trilogy. None of that is relevant though, because Mortal Kombat 2 came out in June of '93, with the home ports coming out in '94, which is hard info to come by because if you search Mortal Kombat 2 release date on Google, you get results for the movie and the sequel to the 2023 video game that just came out as of writing. Anyway, this entire paragraph is cope because my favorite character isn't in the Game Boy port. Losing Johnny Cage wasn't for nothing though, as this port's claim to fame is letting you play as Goro. If you know the appropriate steps and you input them correctly, you too can live as Goro, and well, it's underwhelming to say the least, which is a shame, but what did you really expect from the Game Boy version of Mortal Kombat? It would kind of be like if the only way to play Akuma in Street Fighter 2 was on the Atari ST port of the game. I'm gonna be straight with you. The gameplay in Mortal Kombat for the Game Boy isn't good. Everything moves so slow and sluggish. The Game Boy, having only 2 buttons, had to consolidate some things from its arcade counterpart, which had 4 buttons. There is a punch and a kick button, and when pressed together, you block. I can't tell what the frame rate is for this game, but I can tell you that the hardware struggles to keep up with the fight at times. This game is generally unresponsive, which you have to play around if you want to perform special moves or fatalities. And I'm not just saying that because it's Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat has always had its own different kind of feel to it from other fighting games, but while it still has that Mortal Kombat feeling, the limitations of the hardware are just constraining it so much. The more you play, the more you get used to it, but can you really consider that a good thing? The AI in Mortal Kombat games is notoriously known for cheating and reading inputs. That's not the case here, and if it is, they do a really bad job at it. The computer is extremely easy to beat and can be trapped by just doing sweep on wake up over and over again. I'm not saying I want the AI to cheat, but I'd at least like a challenge, not a punching bag. The only character that should give you any trouble is Goro, who can't be sweeped, but he's nowhere near as hard as his arcade counterpart. He also slows the game down to a crawl, making the game even slower, something I didn't think was possible. Also, some attacks just straight up don't register on Goro, and I can't tell if that's intentional or not. Something that really annoys me is you don't fight Goro in Goro's lair, despite it being one of the 3 stages in the game. After defeating Goro, you fight Shang Tsung, and he's just as easy as the rest, and I'm not surprised. I was surprised that Shang had the ability to morph. This is actually really tricky to program because to morph it requires the fighter's data to be loaded in memory during the match. When your roster is small and you have a 2D game like Mortal Kombat, it's not a big problem, but the bigger the roster gets, the harder it gets to recreate. That's why this aspect of Shang Tsung hasn't reappeared since MK Trilogy, and I don't think it's feasible in a modern fighting game without heavy compromises, which is why I find it all the more impressive that he can do it on the Game Boy of all things. Look, he can even transform into Goro. After you defeat Shang Tsung, the game just ends, and that's it, no endings. Which is a shame because Mortal Kombat, out of any fighting game, has always been story focused. If you look in the instruction booklet, you can not only learn how to play, but also learned a bunch about the characters and plot. Like, look here. Did you know that Sonya had a dead twin brother, Liu Kang? He's actually a fisherman. Ever wonder about Raiden's legal status? Well, he doesn't have one because he's a god, which means he probably doesn't pay taxes. Stuff like this isn't necessary, but it goes a long way in making a fighting game stand out, and has remained one of Mortal Kombat's strongest traits even today. It just goes to show that the Mortal Kombat team has always been ahead of the curve. The only thing left to talk about is the fatalities, so without further ado, I present to you what are quite possibly the worst fatalities I've ever seen. Let's start simple with Liu Kang. Known for having a mid-fatality, it remains mostly the same, but a lot of the frames of animation are missing, making it choppier, but ultimately a faithful recreation. Raiden, on the other hand, has the same idea but different execution. He still electrocutes the opponent, but they just fall down. At the very least, he could have disintegrated them. But no, they just fall over. I guess they're dead. Now, this fatality could have been great if Kano kicked them off the screen and into the stratosphere. But he doesn't, so it sucks. Your eyes do not deceive you. That is Sub-Zero's fatality. He just punches you. That's a far cry from ripping out spines. Talk about a downgrade. The last two fatalities are the best. They're Sonya and Scorpions. Mainly because they're one-to-one recreations, skeletons and all. Overall, I think it would be safe to say that these are the worst fatalities I've ever seen. Yes, worse than the MK versus DC ones. Though, at the very least. They are here, which I guess counts for something. Not much, but something. Mortal Kombat on the Game Boy is a technical marvel, but it's certainly no gameplay masterpiece. The game is plagued with sluggish performance, spotty hit detection, questionable roster omissions, and terrible fatalities. Despite all of that, I can't help but be charmed by this port for one reason or another. I gotta give it to the single developer that programmed this. They did a decent job. A year later, Mortal Kombat 2 would be released on the Game Boy, and I can happily say that this port is 100 times better in every aspect, except there's still no Johnny Cage?
Who hired this guy? What the fuck?